Let us talk about dealing with anxious or intrusive thoughts. In order for us to deal with these kind of thoughts or thought pattern, the first thing we need is an awareness that they're happening. So one of the first things you have to start to practice is learning how to check in with what you're thinking. And remember that just because you have a thought doesn't mean anything. It doesn't have to mean anything. So what we are doing is just literally going, what am I thinking? What is the thought I'm having? And once we can identify the thought, then we can work on the thought. I have a good way of doing this. And what I do is I tell my clients to imagine that every time they have a thought, they basically are holding a balloon with a string, and that is the thought. So that thought is a balloon with a string. If you have 10 different thoughts, then you've got 10 different balloons. Now, what we don't want to do when we have our thoughts is to spend too much time in our thoughts, because we have to remember you are not your thoughts. A thought is just a thing that happens. You don't have to pay too much attention. You don't have to spend too much time thinking about it. You don't have to fuse yourself with the thoughts, because a lot of the time what happens with, especially with intrusive thinking, is we become so embroiled in that thought, so enmeshed with that thought. We go into a cycle of thinking and expanding and thinking and expanding, and thought becomes bigger and scary and frightening. So we don't want to do that. We don't want to fuse with our thoughts. We want to observe our thoughts and let them go. A lot of people use the analogy of thinking about a cloud, thinking about your thoughts are clouds and they're just passing slowly by. I like the balloon because I believe that when you have a thought, especially if you're having problems with anxious thoughts and intrusive thoughts, you need to learn how to assess them. And learning how to assess them means you need to hold the thought first, assess the thought, and then decide when you're ready to let it go. The goal is to let go of every thought once it's served its purpose, right? And it's important that we understand this, because you have to remember that your thoughts generate the stress that you may feel even when there's no danger. Your thoughts generate your anxiety even when there's nothing for you to be anxious about. And your body doesn't know the difference between real stress and perceived stress. So if you are sitting in a chair in your house and you have a thought that scares you, that can trigger the stress response, just as well as if you were about to cross the road and a car comes out of nowhere, that can and should trigger the stress response. But the thing is, the stress response is not always spot on, it's not always accurate. It can be released even when we are not in any danger, because it doesn't know the difference between real and imagined. So that's why our thoughts are important, because if we sit and we have a thought that is scary, frightening, whatever, that thought can trigger the stress response. And this is what triggers anxiety. And then we have anxiety when really we shouldn't be anxious, and so on and so forth. So identifying your thoughts, knowing that they're there, is important. Hold on to them while you assess them. And the assessment of a thought is simply this. Ask yourself these 3 questions. Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it useful? If the answer is no to any of those 3 questions, you can simply let the balloon go, let the thoughts go, because you don't need it, right? If the answer is yes, then you know that you may need to do a bit more assessment. So I'm going to use an example. Let's say you have a job where you have to give loads of presentations, and a week before you had a presentation, didn't go well, you fumbled, it just didn't go well, right? So you have that presentation. And also, you now have another presentation in a couple of weeks. So let's talk about the old presentation. So let's say you're sitting there and a thought comes to your mind saying, you messed up that presentation. You're basically a failure, right? Now, like I said, it's a thought. We hold on to it, balloon and string, right? You ask yourself those 3 questions. Is it true? Well, it's true that you didn't do well in the presentation. Is it useful? No, it's not really useful, because it's just making you feel bad about yourself. Is it helpful? It could be helpful. So the answer to that is yes. It could be helpful because you can learn from your mistakes. What didn't I do well at that presentation? What could I have done better? Once you've established that, you can let the thoughts go. It's no longer useful, right? So we're not caught in that cycle of, oh my God, you're a failure, you didn't do well, you're going to fail, and which is how we start with the cycle of anxious thoughts. So that, very simply, we can have that process go on very quickly, and that's it. Thought is gone. Let's now think you had another thought. Oh my God, I have a presentation in 2 weeks. I'm going to fail again, right? Same thing. It's a thought. We hold on to it. We hold on to the balloon and the string. And we ask ourselves, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it useful? Is it true? Of course it's not. You haven't even had the presentation. Is it helpful? Maybe. Is it useful? Maybe. So go back to those two questions. Is it helpful? Does it help me to sit here and imagine myself failing at something that I haven't done? Really doesn't. So we can discount that. Is it useful? Yep, could be, because sometimes anxiety is good. We have a bit of anxiety about something, and that prompts us to make sure that we do the thing properly. So is it useful? It could be useful because it means that I need to actually remember to practice and to take all the lessons from the ones I didn't do well, blah, 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 right? So it is useful. So you can do that exercise in your head and say, it's useful, this is what I need to do. Now we can let the thoughts go because it serves its purpose. What this does is this breaks the cycle of continuous looping of anxious thoughts or intrusive thoughts, because this is how they start. They start with one thought, which expands, and because we focus on the thought, the thought keeps expanding and gets scarier and bigger, and then we don't know what to do. We get overwhelmed, then we get the stress response, then we have an anxiety attack, and so on and so forth. So I think this is a very useful method. Try it. I hope it works for you. If you have any questions, send me a message. Take care.